I have mentioned previously how just prior to finding the new presentation, I was affiliated with what was referred to as the template, which would be termed as a spiritual path, for want of a better reference. It was, as everything in creation is, something created, an idea, and indeed all ideas, if seen for what they actually are, can be utilized for the purpose that they and all of creation in fact serves, that as comparison to recognize the true reality life is from. The best means of this recognition, or to recognize anything beyond that which we know or have reference for, is a comparison to what it isn't, as of course anything completely new to our experience, we would have no frame of reference by which to identify it by. In the computer games we play, if we happen to indulge in such, everything contained within the game, the features and geography, are as data files we have uploaded to our computers, and through the decoding mechanisms of the computer, so this data is rendered as graphics, scenery, and experience on the screen. Creation is designed along these lines, in that the ideas of the particular simulator our real awareness has selected, so to say, are agreed to formulate a consciousness that, like the computer, is then the storehouse where the uploaded data we need to play the game, the simulator of our choosing, is contained. The consciousness effects then a body vehicle with the facility to decode the data of the chosen simulator into graphics, visuals, and experience, just like the computer that renders the data of the game onto the screen. And so, what we can't experience in a simulator, if it hasn't as yet been created, would be something the computer doesn't contain as files, and technically then we can't experience anything beyond the parameters of the game we have uploaded, as nothing beyond the files that make it up can be rendered on the screen as a simulation, again unless we additionally add to how the game currently stands. And so very easy would it be to remain where we are, to cycle on the spot with what we have known, to remain in the limited games we have chosen for ourselves, the data we have uploaded that has us enclosed within our little simulated realities, within the overall simulator arena we operate within, a vast multi-dimensional arena, yet most generally choose to resign themselves to very limited areas of it. But as the deciders of our experience, at any moment can we decide to see and be more, and as everything equals and reflects itself, intent, decision, agreement must generate that which is its nature. An intent to see and be more will generate the circumstances and the situations where this can be so. And although we are resigned to whatever the simulator is we happen to be within, our own personal experience within it can become far more so multi-dimensional as we so choose, and indeed we can create anything within this overall stadium simulator arena, as the mechanics of creation are designed this way. Anything we decide, choose, are formulated as idea files which must yield their nature. And just like the commercial computer gamers, our characters can explore the entirety of the game thus presented, or limit themselves to certain areas as they so choose, and as our character does explore more so the simulator, the game it is within, so the computer processes new data into a simulation on the screen. But with these computer gamers, the work is already done by the computer's mechanics, and although we might think that our own idea decoding mechanics are automatic also, and indeed the decoding process does operate of its own accord, the human decoding mechanisms, for example, are very limited, and indeed have been purposely manipulated to be so, in that far less of what should be decoded into what we perceive as the physical world is being processed, as though we are constructing our physical level simulation as best as our mechanics are able from a very limited array of data, and then piecing it together in a way that makes visual sense. And this is how the controllers can manipulate the very simulation we are perceiving through the human consciousness-affected body vehicles. For through the agreements they have to thus manipulate humanity as they see fit, so can they tweak and alter the human consciousness, that the affected body vehicles are more limited in their ability to decode a simulator as it actually is, one shrouded in darkness, as the simulator continues its demise spiral, and instead decode a simulator as the controllers wish us to see it as, a kind of cyberspace overlap that obscures to a great extent the deteriorated, dark and oppressive state the simulator happens to be in. For indeed, the very planet Earth, were it observed through a body vehicle mechanics, where the consciousness that effects these decoding mechanics have not been manipulated, the planet would look like a dark and black inky ball, and not the vibrant blue and green planet we are presented with. But anyway, as I was saying, regardless of the extent of a consciousness manipulation that affects the degree by which an individual or species can decode the simulation as it actually is, as the simulation has been agreed through the overall consciousness to be, as we so decide to explore that which we have no personal self-reference for in creation, just like the computer gamers, where even though our game character hasn't explored the entirety of the game, and yet the entirety of the game is uploaded to the computer, so it is with any simulator we operate within. We have uploaded the entirety of however the target simulator currently is, how the ideas of the overall consciousness that affect it happen to be in the moment we do so. And although we may have no personal self-reference or current lifetime memory of the new areas we are exploring as we go multi-dimensional, these files already are present in the consciousness. A consciousness that is now part of this overall consciousness that affects the simulator we are in. Through the ideas the overall consciousness has decided on that affect this overall simulator stadium. And as we enter what are for us unexplored creational areas, they may be very nonsensical in relation to what we know, and the decoding apparatus will do its best according to its design, as every species decodes slightly differently according to their respective consciousness. Some individuals can't decode certain colours, for example. Certain animals only can decode a simulation into a black and white, etc. And so as the decoding mechanisms make sense of this new data, it's as though it utilises that which already is known, is experienced, in order to determine how best to arrange the new data into a simulation, which would be this comparison mechanism. If we are decoding water for the first time, how the simulation of it comes out is really very secondary. We could perceive it as anything really in regards to its feel, taste and appearance, but it is the baseline underlying data that is being processed. How the data that is the baseline for land differs to the data that is the baseline for water, and then the comparison of the two data streams would have it decoded in a way that presents a clear differential between what is land and what is water. But ultimately, as expansive as our exploration of the simulator is, realistically, we have it already uploaded as files in the consciousness. The game is already present in its multi-dimensional entirety. We are just really exploring what is already there, and decoding it according to the body mechanics of the species we happen to be. And so this comparison also extends beyond creation, the same mechanism to determine something new from something known. We now can apply to the recognition of the true reality, where we effectively take the entirety of creation, every idea it comprises of, as everything of it is that which the is not. Only now we are not decoding a new data into a simulation. We are beyond data, beyond ideas. We are no longer encapsulating pieces, parts, ideas, and confining ourselves to the affected, limited simulation of them as afforded through the mechanisms of creation. Aside from all ideas, is this everything all life is, an everything reality that, like the sun shining, just is, a wholeness that can't be encapsulated with ideas. For the moment an idea is applied, this is then something that isn't everything, and we isolate ourselves from the whole as we embrace but a piece of it. And so everything in creation has its purpose, regardless of what the idea or experience may be, as every idea is simply another comparison to recognize the is from. This would include then all created so-called spiritual paths, religions, etc., and regardless of what is manifested from these chosen paths and pursuits, these are just effect happenings within the simulator, and we then are simply making adjustments to our positioning and circumstance within the overall game simulator arena. But unless we decide and have the intent to recognize the is, we just circulate in creation with these various ideas and the effects they generate. As really, unless a spiritual so-called path or practice makes reference to the is, then it represents nothing other than taplines, idea agreements that bind you to the effects and keep you in creation, as every idea clung to a will. The template would be one such path, their objective always to make alterations to the consciousness that will effect then more favourable positioning in creation, and technically this would be accurate, as a consciousness effects a simulation, so to make changes to it must yield a simulation that changes in accordance, and yet these alterations, these creational repositionings, would just be occurring within the overall boundary of this creation realm, and it is a simulator that is deteriorating to its inevitable implosion if agreement and restriction and unconsciousness through the overall consciousness that affects the overall simulator continues to be so, and indeed becomes more so. And as I have shared before, as we go about the process of releasing our agreements and attachments with all the ideas and the individuals we have had experience with, so as we sever these agreements, especially as they pertain to the idea of other individuals, ideas no longer installed in our consciousness cannot allow then the individuals whose ideas they might be to feature in our real side simulated experiences, as potentially on the real side we can be beyond the consciousness if we choose, and beyond then this overall simulated arena, where, as it is a simulator generated by the shared ideas of all the consciousness that affect it, so as ideas are shared, the ideas that are the simulator so must experience, and therefore the simulator we are in is one shared by all others whose consciousness is a part of the effecting of it, and so no one is beyond the reach of any other. On the real side, we can, however, be within our own simulated reality bubbles, and only if there is a direct agreement with other individuals, consciously or subconsciously, can they enter it. And so our process of releasing these agreements will have us where less and less other individuals can impose on our real side simulation, unless we are operating directly in a creation, the multi-dimensional levels of it as effected from consciousness, in which case then it is once again an open arena where anyone can potentially encounter any other. But even as we are releasing our agreements to others, unless they are on their process of awareness and doing likewise, they will retain all agreements to all they have had affiliation with throughout the lifetimes in the simulator. For every idea, every agreement and attachment is filed as it is in the consciousness, but it's as though, unless a conscious decision is made to release all these ideas, they all will remain automatically attached to, and always will be affecting then their nature, as until we recognize the real awareness and begin the journey of is recognition, we are in a complete agreement and immersion with the consciousness, which is agreement then with everything it comprises of, all the ideas it contains, and so very often we can engage with such individuals if we so decide, even as we have released agreements to them, as they are retaining their own, and they always leave the door open, so to speak, that we can, if we so choose, feature in their simulation. There have been real side experiences recently where individuals from this template I was once affiliated with have been featuring, and generally, if individuals are very closed off with their restricting and limiting ideas, there would be no sense in attempting to approach and engage with them, with our presenting of the ears, opportunity, etc. However, these individuals, though still very much attached to their relocation to better areas of creation ideas, have been also open to the references of the ears of late, as I have continued to encounter them on the real side, and providing them other information regarding creation, its nature and mechanics, etc. And so it is that if individuals are open to more than they are self-convinced about, so it makes sense to share with them the new sound and the ears references, etc. And indeed, on a recent real side experience I shared, these individuals, who seemingly had developed the ability to alter consciousness, which is their idea, to alter consciousness and effect altered experiential creational positioning, they would extend an offer to make beneficial consciousness changes to mine and others, and my real awareness impressions would not only assure me that they were capable of such, but that their intentions were also sincere and would prove beneficial. For while we are in creation, it makes sense to make our stay as easy as is feasible and realistic, while we are recognizing the ears and going about our awareness process. And if consciousness alterations can effect better circumstances, therefore, it makes sense to do so, as long as we maintain our focus with the real purpose of is recognition, and not get lost in the ideas we are playing with in creation, as beneficial as they may be. On this occasion, a large group of the template people would invite me now to accompany them, that they might assist me still further through their consciousness-altering capabilities. And what can happen is, if individuals have been sincere in past experiences, we can fall into the consideration and assumption that this sincerity is absolute and will remain so. But we're dealing generally with personal self-immersed, personal self-serving, and attitude-driven individuals, the length and breadth of creation, and so it pays to err on the side of caution when we're dealing with anyone who is creationally mired and isn't embracing their awareness process, as after all who are locked into agreement with the consciousness are very much at the mercy of much by way of subliminal bombarding and programming by the dark forces, and all who are consciousness agreeing will be motivated by the influence in addition, the influence as an expression of whatever the overall consciousness inclination tends to be. And as the consciousness generally is designed with its thrill-seeking foundation, that has the agreeable personal self who chooses a consciousness immersion to be quite content to remain in creation, so then the influence is an expression of this, does what is necessary to ensure every being remains in creation, through whatever thrill-seeking, seductive measures are required. And so, through the personal self-immersed individual will always be operating the influence, as the influence is interwoven with the consciousness that such an individual is in full agreement with, and as we engage with such individuals, so can they be thus influenced to do that which may snare and tapline us also, if we indeed agree and allow that this be so, if we allow ourselves to be drawn into their created, distorted ideas, and lose our focus and real intent. And as the dark force controllers have the agreements through all consciousness practically as to their power and dominance, so again they have the permissions to impact the experience of all who have extended this agreement to the dark force's power, and as their controlled matrix is dependent on agreement to maintain it, they surely don't want anyone to begin a process where this agreement support structure to their designed matrix is lessened, and so will work through those still locked into agreement with their dark force managed consciousness to motivate them through the control agreements they have over them that allows that they can implant ideas, inclination and drive to snare others they are engaging with, if those they are engaging with happen to be those on their awareness processes. And indeed, as agreement through a consciousness generally is to the dark force reptilian controllers, a consciousness agreeable and personal self-immersed individual represents a package of ideas that includes those of the dark force reptilians, their inclinations and controlling consciousnesses, as agreement between beings is an interweaving of their consciousnesses, which become effectively as one, and so, should we agree with one, we agree with the other, whose ideas of consciousness are interwoven with. We agree to these personal self-immersed individuals. We are taking on also the ideas of all. They share these agreement, interweaving, consciousness contracts with, and effectively can be taplined by the reptilians through these individuals that have agreements with them. And so, a sincere individual, if they have our trust, the dark forces and the influence can turn them in a moment, and they can represent another tap-lining agent, as opposed to the beneficial assistance they were perhaps previously rendering. And really then, it has reached a stage where it must be pondered as to how much of the thought ideas you are generating, the idea motivations and drives you have, that are actually self-generated, and how much is implanted. And just like a computer receiving the web pages, etc., that appear on its screen from the commands punched in on the keyboard, the computer, the consciousness personal self, wouldn't know from which source the commands, the ideas installed, were coming from. And so, we ought to generally endeavour to remain in the nowness of the real awareness, as from this position, as the real awareness is part of this one overall isness awareness that is through all consciousness, so can all the ideas that make up all consciousness, including intent, be determined. But if we have our considerations as to who we think is sincere or not, well-intended or not, based on past experience, any consideration, thought, conviction, are ideas that we are generating through the body vehicles, which as we do so, we are removed from the real awareness, nowness standing, and lose our real awareness, intent, discernment of all who enter our experience, or in the very least we are obscuring or disregarding the real awareness warning impressions, as we think we know better than the real awareness which is this everything reality, and has access then to everything idea-wise as a featuring through a consciousness in creation. Without the real awareness discernment, we have only our personal self-references and what we can determine from the visual simulation of the experience, and not the ideas and intent that is behind everything we see simulated on the surface. This was such a situation where through the beneficial assistance these individuals had previously provided, so I assumed their sincerity was maintained, and as such disregarded real awareness impressions, which had I paid attention to, would have assured the personal self that these individuals now were representing nothing other than tap-lining agents and creational snares, although everything experience-wise, regardless of the mishaps and blunders we make, nothing is beyond rectifying or readjusting, as everything is based on agreement and decision, and poor decisions and agreements can just as readily switch to those that make more sense with life. As long as the overall intent is with the ears, everything simulated must roll out to what is in reality, as everything is what it is now, an intent already actualized, and as long as that real intent is maintained, a few blunders, detours, etc. can have no lasting impact, other than maybe delaying the process perhaps. But we ought not delay for too long. The simulator is somewhat close to implosion, as agreements in the consciousness stand. And so the scene switched. I accompanied these individuals to a very dark and gloomy cave-like area, and surely then the scenery was rather an indication of the sort of ideas these individuals now were playing with, everything reflecting itself as it does. For they wanted my participation in a series of ritualistic-like ceremonies that, according to them, would further be of benefit to myself and all who were involved. At this point, however, as generally, despite a little back and forth between personal self-standing and real awareness, nowness positioning, I tend to gravitate towards the nowness, real awareness, almost as a habit now on the real side. And when we are so positioned with the real awareness reality, which is and has access to everything, so we receive our impressions, and that which the personal self received here was that these individuals, although previously their actions and assistance had been beneficial, were now representing that which was anything but, as though, as I said earlier, they had been influenced by the influence or manipulated by the dark forces to attempt to ensnare and embroil myself with their funny, restricting and distorted ideas. And they would have no inkling that they were now effectively tap-lining agents. They genuinely maintained that what they were doing was beneficial, but until individuals realize that anything created, any idea, is a potential tap-lining effect generating snare, if agreed and clung to, then they won't understand how what they are doing, whatever it may be, even if it does seem to yield positive results, is realistically doing nothing more than keeping them and all who agree in creation. And indeed, the older, the more archaic ceremony is, as often as spiritual paths delight in the use of ritual, and the older the better from their perspective, the more the idea that their ritual or ceremony will be laced and weighted down with further ideas, and who knows as to what these additional ideas will be. For anything created, any idea, over time, will have further idea considerations and notions affiliated with it. An idea then becomes far more convoluted, and oftentimes the depths of its nature, all the additional ideas that are attached to an idea, may not be visually surface apparent, And like any idea that we agree with, that as we do, we experience the effects of its nature, so will ideas laden with unseen ideas be then a package of ideas that as we agree to the surface idea, we are agreeing also with the additional ideas attached with it, and effect then the nature of the entire bundle. The religious ideas are affiliated, for example, with the ideas of death and sacrifice, as this has always been a practice associated with religion through the ages, and as religion is reptilian created, so also is this agreement to the reptilians and all the ideas they are involved with. And so, what seems like an innocent enough place of worship on the surface is a package of distorted ideas that we are accepting and incorporating into our consciousness, which will yield effected experience that are the nature of such ideas. And so anything created, any idea, will become distorted over time, will have additional idea baggage applied, like a website that becomes infected with viruses. The viruses we don't see as we click on what seems a good website on the surface, but viruses that our protection software can determine and warn us about, a little like how the real awareness will afford us these impressions of everything ill-intended and untoward, individual or idea-wise in our presence, determining that which the personal self can't realize. The personal self dealing only with the surface view, the websites, as it does. And so, having determined this to be the case, that were I to go along with these rituals, would I be agreeing with distorted ideas that would yield no benefit awareness speaking, other than another example of that which makes sense not to do and be involved with, and with another comparison to recognize the is by, as all ideas of creation can serve the purpose of providing, I would decline their offer. But every situation is an opportunity. Our purpose, while in creation, is to promote the is and the real guides, and share the opportunity of the true reality to all. And so, before I departed, I would attempt to do just this, but was met with much by way of resistance and rebuttal. They would proclaim how that which Duane was speaking of and referencing made no sense to them, and dismissed it all as nonsense. For the personal self hasn't the facility to understand the is, as it is only designed to create, process, and deal with the simulation. The personal self is all about the creating of ideas, of thought forms, considerations, and convictions in response to the experiences generated through the ideas decided and agreed to. But anything created has nothing to do with the is, and so nothing of the mechanics of the created self can be utilized to fathom out the is, as anything created isn't what the is. It is a true reality, aside from the ideas generated, through the body vehicles, and so we can't think, consider, or imagine what the is, as when we do this, we are just creating ideas that reference it, which are not the reality of what is being referenced. We can only recognize it, and no amount of idea application or creation will assist with such a recognition, other than those ideas as a further comparison for what the isn't. And so the experience ended there, and really overall a verification of the importance of always maintaining our real awareness, nowness positioning, the best place to be positioned, where we have access to potentially everything, impressions that always will stand us in a good stead as we are confronted with the various simulated surface ideas in our experiences, and the various individuals with their varying intents and inclinations. That every idea is potentially a creational snare if we cling to it and don't see it for what it is, if we make what is created and not real our reality, as the idea is to get through all ideas of a creation. We utilize what we do if it has a benefit and makes a sense, but ultimately we endeavor to establish universal positioning with the is, aside from any idea of creation that always will affect its limited creational nature, that if we so limit ourselves, we then are encapsulated in positions of something as opposed to the position of everything, everything that the isness, true reality, and the real awareness that we are, that is a part of it, is.
Yeah, as I said, it was this group of individuals I was associated with. It was one of various spiritual paths and pursuits I was involved with before I came to the new presentation. I've done all sorts of funny things before I came here and in previous lifetimes, and so it's a case of all these individuals occasionally will pop into my experience. And like Duane says, a lot of times when you do have you have been through these various paths and religions, when you do move past them and into the new presentation and into your real awareness is recognizing process, a lot of them do attempt to sort of bring you and drag you back into it, sort of thing, because as I said in the experience, they will be influenced to do so, and obviously dark force control and manipulated also. And a lot of times they can be a bit sneaky as well. It's like this bunch, as I said, it started off with them seemingly very open to the references I was presenting, these references and such. But then as time went by, it became a bit more funny. And then as this recent experience would, then it moved on to a point where they were providing what seemed like a beneficial service, as I mentioned, in regards to consciousness alteration, which as my real awareness impressions assured me were actually beneficial. And unfortunately it then moved into this most recent experience where it came far more distorted, and they went along more so trying to draw me into these very strange ritualistic ceremony type activities that would, should I have participated in, I would have been tap blind consequently. But and as I said, because I assumed they were sincere, my assumptions rather overlapped my real awareness discernment, and as such I was drawn into their activities. But of course then, as usually the case, if you, as a practice, you tend to maintain the nowness of real awareness, generally you tend to revert to type. So generally, regardless of maybe stepping into the personal self, you will generally almost spring back into your real awareness standing, and so you'll suddenly, if you have inadvertently placed yourself in your personal self and therefore obscured your real awareness discernment, usually a few moments later you tend to re-establish it and then suddenly realise, oh shit, I made a mistake here, and then you have to extract yourself from the situation. But then again, had you not have gone into that situation, you wouldn't have had that experience. And so, in a way, perhaps, I mean, sometimes I've found with these experiences that the real awareness will not actually provide you these impressions at all for that very reason. So you end up blundering into these situations. So you have some of these more, abrasive and situations that you then have to deal with and creatively manage and work yourself through. And so again, as you do that, you become more stronger, more capable for it, and also it makes a greater array of experiences and viewpoints that you can then share. So yeah,
as long as your intent's there, then whatever you go through, it's okay. You'll have the opportunity to recognize. I was talking to the local shaman here yesterday, and he shared an experience on the real side, or his dream state, where he keeps going back to this warehouse that he used to work. So he's actually himself, he's not being drawn there. He's actually going back on purpose, you could say, in his dream state to this place where he used to work. In the last experience, he was confronted by some of the employees there, came up to him and said, like, what are you doing here? Like, you don't work here anymore. He was shuffling through some clothing or some uniforms that he used to wear, and he was wondering why his name wasn't on there anymore, on the label, on the uniform. And they were saying, you don't work here anymore. But he was drawn back there because he doesn't have any other reference, really, on the real side to work from. And that's, he just seems to anchor himself into this position. And in a way, it kind of showed like he's working his way out of there, but it's a work in progress, you could say, because he's going back to this workplace. But again, he without the reference, you had a reference there, your real awareness, real universes, so you're in good shape. But these other people that don't have references, they get bumped around a lot until they come upon something that's real. In this case, this is like a recurring dream for this fellow. And he'd gone blind, actually, from stepping on 3 nails in a sweat lodge about 6 months ago. His foot got infected, and it went up into affected his eyesight. So he's having trouble seeing. So it could be part of his karma too, etc. But he's been having more dreams now since he can't see outwardly as well. And one of these dreams is he goes back to this area a lot. So there's people in that experience. There's one fellow that keeps showing up that is hinting that, you could move on. What are you doing here? But he's got to recognize that and take the risk to do something else. And he knows about us, so he has the opportunity to see more, and we'll see. But thank you, Kevin. Anybody else out there like to comment or share an experience?
The experience was of my personal self, what looked like my body form physically, in a room, and it was doing some sort of task that seemed pretty mundane. It was sorting paperwork, it was moving papers from left to right, and blah blah blah. But what came to me was an impression to be indifferent to what seemed to be this mundane task. And even though I didn't have a total understanding in a literal sense of what that was, I put my awareness in that indifferent view. And what happened next was I was positioned outside of the room in this blank space, this all white space, and I was looking down into the room as if it was like a display, and I could see the body form moving back and forth and doing still what it was doing, but I was positioned in that indifferent view, so I wasn't a part of that, but I was objective to it, and I just wanted to share that first, if anyone has any comments.
I kind of had something like that twice on my hike from Mexico to Canada, where it was an odd feeling of indifference, where I was, because I put so much effort into the hike, and so challenging, but somehow that brought me into an objective viewpoint, an indifference. It was almost very like blissful, but it was sort of an odd experience, but it reminded me of what you had there.
Okay, and the next experience, it's a slightly lengthy. I'll read it out though. Okay. So I wrote, this experience began with me in a city, which itself represents the social consciousness and the agreements of the individuals choosing to reside within it. And in this city, I found myself in a particular spot that was circular, and all around me was doors in 360 degrees. Each door a person's house, and in this moment, I perceived a map with a golden marker on it, and I became aware that this is where I need to position myself. The golden marker itself can be seen as my intent, a real intent to recognize the is more so than the personal self and what is agreed upon in creation. So, this being so, I set off to the point, opening the many doors that were before me to no avail. This seemed fruitless until I decided to climb to the rooftops, all interconnected as they were. Utilizing my awareness to reposition myself and become objective to the circumstance before me. With my body now on the rooftops, I was able to see so much more than before, and even a massive tree sprouted above the city with no perceivable end to it. The outstretched limbs combed the rooftops, and one very large branch set before me acted as a path for myself to take. And sitting onto this path, I could see the marker on the other side of the trunk on the branch opposite where I was. It was a better position for the personal self in order to reach this specific point, and the tree itself could relate to many things. And one can be the real awareness, and with the decided upon intent that was the golden marker, being as it seemed to make sense with the whole of life, more so than just the personal self, the real awareness supporting the personal self to come into this position. And really, the position is always available, but a choice must be made to position yourself in such a way that you are able to recognize what is already available to you with your real awareness. Another view of the tree can be that it represents life itself. When you take the risk to get above and see more than what is agreed upon, which was seen by visually climbing the rooftops, life supports you. And quickly after I woke, I remembered I made a conscious consideration as to the treetop and to what seemed to be no end to it. And I wondered how much I could see from the top of this tree, as it seemed to be endless per my impression. And I got a flash image for the personal self of Rebazar standing upon the top of the tree. On a thin branch adorned in the blue robe, I seen images made by Duane and Eva, and at his feet to the left of himself was a hawk or eagle's nest with 3 eggs inside of it, and to the right of himself a golden position, the same as the one before me on the branch I was on. So we see that upon deciding to see what is available for us, we come into the recognition of what real positions are already available to us. It's only a matter of the personal self going through the process for it to become so. And that was the last experience. Yeah, I wanted to add a couple of views about the big tree because the tree was massive, like I said, and I saw it relating to a few things like the real awareness or life itself, so I wanted to throw those in there.
I think that's the one for a Facebook group. If you could write it down, maybe share it in a Facebook group. That's great.
Sure. Comment on one thing Kevin had mentioned in his experience, to where he said at a certain point you have to sort of wonder about which thought forms are you creating and which ones are implemented into your consciousness for you to sort of project sort of automatically, like in a subconscious type of way. And I wanted to just comment that that's very, very real, because I just had an experience to where this individual that I no longer am associated with physically, in a subconscious sense, he sent me files to my phone. And I remember looking at my phone and it just dumped all these sort of images and all this other kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I need to clean all that out. That was the immediate response, was to clean all this out. Because these individuals, they're sort of, whether it be emotional attachment or whatever, will linger in the subconscious. And then these certain things will influence you because you're not aware. You're sort of choosing not to become aware of it, but when you decide, you see it.
Yeah, and again, I think that I see that intent as being very important. Then you can see through all this, even though you get yourself into trouble, like Kevin does a lot. Because you're sharing a lot, Kevin. So you're sharing, what you're going through. So it's whether it's so-called good or bad, you're seeing through it, which is really cool. You're seeing through it because of your intent.